Well, here we are. It's been a long journey through the history of Paldea, but we finally reached the present. I think we're now ready to put everything together, once and for all. No, please let me go back to that post. Please let me go back. Anyway, hi, I'm Dream. I've been staring at my notes for an entire day before finally writing this script. I present to you this confusing mess of connections. Once you get into the contemporary history of Paldea, there are a lot more moving parts that need to be addressed. The appearance of the Pokémon League, the Tera Project, some connections with the DLCs, and other plot lines that are interwoven into the narrative of this game. Hopefully, this video will manage to address them in a way that is digestible. I'm not going to steal more of your time. Let's get right into it. After the Area Zero expedition ended 200 years ago, in what the manga describes as the biggest hoax of the century, the people of Paldea did not give up investigating the Great Crater. In fact, 140 years ago, the terrestrial phenomenon was uncovered in the Great Crater of Paldea. Researchers made their way down Area Zero and discovered Pokémon cloaked in a mysterious light for the first time, something we now know as terrestrialized Pokémon. However groundbreaking this discovery was, though, they couldn't really find any use for it. After all, as soon as they attempted to bring those Pokémon out of the crater, they returned to normal and lost their shine. This happens because of what we addressed in one of the earlier episodes. The terrestrial phenomenon requires constant exposure to the crystals to have an effect, and by this point in time, there probably weren't any crystals scattered around the surface of the region. Needless to say, investigations surrounding terrestrialized Pokémon stood at an impasse for a long time. Ryford immediately jumps to the nearby past, around 10 years ago, but I believe there is a lot that happened between these 2 points in time that is worthy of mention. 87 years ago, the first research station was built in Area Zero. I imagine the discovery of terrestrialized Pokémon must have revitalized scientific interest in the Great Crater, which led to pouring more resources into its investigation. For various reasons, I believe the Pokémon League was probably formed after this. More than a decade ago, the Pokémon League provided support for research on Area Zero, the Great Crater at the center of Paldea. We know the Academy was modified at some point to include the Pokéball on its roof, which indicates a transition towards Pokémon battles and, more importantly, the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame and the structure of the Paldean League is very interesting, and much different from most other regions. Only those who have proven their worth and become a part of the Hall of Fame are allowed to investigate Area Zero, and the Paldean League serves more as an exam to become a champion. Consider how many failed attempts there had been at investigating the Great Crater in the past, and the reason why the League was formed becomes obvious. It is a way to find people who are talented at what they do, to become more selective in their process to decide who gets to investigate Area Zero, and perhaps to motivate students through competition. Gita's dialogue heavily pushes this idea across her various appearances. She talks about Pokemon matches as exhibitions to set an example and motivate others. She calls her Glimora the light that guides all trainers, and she often scouts young talent. In the Indigo Disc DLC, she has a very interesting motive to reach out to Blueberry Academy for help with studying Area Zero after recent events. But at our Pokemon League, we've had trouble finding capable personnel, not to mention time, to study Area Zero. So I apologize that we are not better equipped to deal with this ourselves. Paldea is clearly a region that has gone through a long periods of decadence, as we have seen in earlier videos, and this has carried on into the present. Even now, there's just not enough capable trainers in Paldea to deal with everything. Larry has to serve as both a gym leader and a member of the Elite Four. They can't repair some things in the League building because the schedule of the repair crew is completely full, and now they're even forced to ask other regions for help to deal with their problems. And yet, Gita handpicks every single gym leader. She handpicks all the Elite Four members. She investigates other regions to learn of their systems. She makes sure the League provides services like flying taxis to trainers in Paldea, and she even serves as the chairwoman for both the League and the Academy. I'm just a trainer who finds fulfillment in seeking out rare young talent. Gita is someone who, above all else, wants Paldea and its people to shine brightly. She considers herself to be a regular trainer, but she pours all her effort into making this region bloom nonetheless. But maybe, just maybe, she flew a little too close to the sun. In her search for talent to investigate Area Zero in other regions, she found two researchers, Jack and Clabel. We know they used to be researchers that worked together way before they joined the Academy, as Jack himself points out during his classes. Clabel, in the DLC, mentions that Cyrano and him studied together at the same university a long time ago, which tells us that he did not study in Paldea. This is further proven by the fact neither Clabel or Jack's names appear on the Hall of Fame in the Academy building in Paldea. They must have been recruited from outside. Eventually, rumors of a genius in the Academy spread between their peers. Someone who used the room that now belongs to the director director of the academy as a lab, and who would go on to become one of the champions of Paldea after officially entering the Hall of Fame. This genius was, obviously, Sara or Turo depending on the version of the game. Ryford herself states how Clavel was part of the professor's research team, and he clearly had a close relationship with the professor because of how he talks about them. The other version's professor, however, would probably also be part of this team, albeit, of course, without nearly as much recognition. Sara in Pokémon Violet never read the Scarlet book because it didn't exist, and the same can be said about Turo in Pokémon Scarlet. Without that book to capture their imagination when they were children, they would never have the passion they have in the other version. Still, while researching together, Sara and Turo probably fell in love. Regardless, it is here that they join Clavel and Jack's research team, and here begins my mental breakdown. These stupid journals are the bane of my existence. They are clearly presented in chronological order, but there are some issues that appear when compared with the encounter at the crystal pool. Let's tackle this one step at a time. We've determined that this energy crystallization is linked to the being we call Terapagos. The interlocking hexagonal plates that comprise Terapagos' shell must somehow cause this phenomenon, which I've dubbed terastallizing. There are a couple of things of note here. Terapagos' name is censored here, in the same way it is censored in the Scarlet and Violet books. However, the professor clearly knows about Terapagos. Its name is in the journal entries in the Underdepths, and they also know about it when they encounter us in the crystal pool. That is to say, I believe the full story about Terapagos might have been a secret that is only known by members of the Pokémon League and those who are allowed to research Area Zero. However, after a certain Koraidon and Miraidon shipped event, the name might have been censored altogether from any records the League had access to. This is also probably the reason why Gita made changes to the library a while back. As she herself states, I believe she knows way more than she lets on, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Thanks to my prototype Tera Orb, I secured corporate funding for my research and made a laboratory in the lighthouse near Cabo Poco. Someday though, I'll return to the crater and resume my study of these crystals. The Tera Project might have gone through some hiccups, as Sara or Turo go to Cabo Poco at this point in time. The Japanese text for the next entry specifically states that the project was frozen and later unfrozen again. However, when Sara or Turo go back and move their research to the Zero Lab, they have a smaller team, probably consisting of only the two of them. We know Jack and Clavel had to leave the research team at some point around here. After all, Clavel is surprised when he learns that the professor actually managed to bring Pokemon from other timelines into our own. This means that this idea was something the professor had already thought about and talked about before the Tera Project got frozen, and perhaps it was the early experiments with crystals that caused the corporate backers to pull back support. During this time, the professor might have spent time in Cabo Poco with their partner. The reason it resumed is, most likely, that a different group of sponsors gained interest in the Tera Project presented by Sara or Turo. In fact, I believe I know exactly who sponsored the Tera Project. Presenting Cyrano. The Terrarium is not a project that spawned in a single day, no. It's made with technology that's clearly inspired by Area Zero and by the terrestrial energy that the professor was researching. Clavel himself notes how he constantly finds himself at the mercy of his whims. Right from the start, I found myself rather at the mercy of his whims. This state of affairs continued even once I had been appointed as director of our academy. Therefore, is it not likely that Cyrano heard about the project from Clavel and then sponsored Sara and Turo to benefit from it? Maybe he even had some people of his own on Sara and Turo's team who sent him the Indigo Disc in the future. It is a disc that was sent by an Area Zero researcher to an investor some time ago. Clavel mentions how Cyrano is the one that made him wear Premier Balls in the first place, just as he does. And do you know what item you find in a cave in the Area Zero Underdepths when you defeat a Stellar Terra-type Garchomp? You find a Premier Ball, the only Pokeball you can find in that place. I think the implication is obvious. Cyrano had his hands all over the Tera Project and used it to build the terrarium as we know it. At some point, the professor makes their way into the Underdepths of Area Zero, where there is a higher concentration of crystals. They refer to this place as their secret lab, and even made the Indigo Disc to give the elevator the hidden functionality of taking them down there. The crystal's power is tremendous. Their unstable output made our corporate backers fret, but if we can harness this energy, it will open up research possibilities we've only ever dreamed of. At last, paradise will be ours to create. Around here is when I believe the professor experiences their first conversation with someone thanks to the crystals. It's not us though. When they talk to us, they seem to understand the mechanics of the encounter pretty well. They're even able to spot when the conversation is going to end because of the mist. I believe first they had an encounter with Heath. This is when they tell Heath about Terapagos, when they tell them about terastallization, and Heath writes it all down, what we talked about in the fourth part of the series. Because of this, and what they see in the Underdepths, they realize the things in the book they have admired for so long are real. And if they are real, why can the Pokemon they have been fascinated with for so long be real as well? Why should ancient Pokemon so powerful be fated to go extinct? Why should future Pokemon be treated as as objects, weapons, and things to be feared, they also deserved a paradise. It is here that the professor starts taking their research into a time machine more seriously. It is also here though that things become a little more confusing. In the Crystal Pool encounter from the DLC, the professor we talked to mentions that they have a family, Arvin, and that he must be feeling lonely. But they also mention how they're still building the time machine to retrieve Pokemon from different timelines. That is to say, by the time Koraidon and Miraidon were brought into this world, Arvin was already born and the professor's partner already left. The Crystal Pool encounter also implies that we gave them that Koraidon and Miraidon name. However, in our timeline, things actually happened differently. Look at the entry where they retrieve the Paradox Pokemon. Our time machine research has yielded a triumph, a Pokemon from an ancient past. I have named it Koraidon. I was expecting one new life to treasure, but what fortune to be blessed with this gift as well. The tone is obviously happy. They've been blessed with Arvin, and it doesn't sound like their partner has left them yet. In fact, they continue their research and mention how close they are to building their ideal world. They've clearly already gotten their hands on the Briar book, and it has allowed them to build a time machine. Is this a contradiction? I don't think so. But for that, we'll have to continue digging deeper into our own timeline for a little bit. I've successfully brought more and more ancient Pokemon to our time since the first one. I'm so close to creating a world like the one in the book, a paradise where we three can live happily together forever. I must make it real. The three of them. The Paradox Pokemon, themselves, and Arvin. Not their partner though. It is here that we get a hint as to how the professor really feels about their partner, but they've never really spoken about in their notes. The relationship might have been somewhat strained, especially because of the professor's devotion to their own research, never really paying too much attention to the family they've had. I need more people, more time. That man walked out not long after the boy was born. I need another set of hands, but how could they be trusted? And how long would it take for them to even understand? If only there were two of me. So then, their partner leaves, and now they're left alone with their research. But there's one aspect of this game that feels very strange to me, because it's never really addressed. It is a fact that the AI professor mentions, but it never comes up in the story. It is theoretically possible to travel to the past or future. However, for a being such as a human, it would not be possible to return to the present. Instead of saying that the man or woman walked out, most other translations use something more vague. In fact, the Japanese uses sata, which has the more vague meaning of leaving and often has a sense of finality. You're leaving something permanently, you're moving far away, you're departing from the world, things like that. I present to you the hypothesis that the professor's partner, upon realizing they did not belong in the paradise their lover wanted to build, chose to depart from the world by going into the machine. And that is how the AI professor, which I will remind you is built from the memories of the professor, knows so certainly that a human would not be able to return. The professor goes back to the lighthouse for a bit, with Arvin and the Paradox Pokemon they retrieved. They try to keep it a secret, but a fight with wild Pokemon exposes their Koraidon or Miraidon. I imagine Gita told them to return to Area Zero after hearing of this incident, and the professor did exactly that. Once that research was complete, we shifted our duties to monitoring and managing the area. Area Zero is full of mysteries, and also danger. The professor was only meant to monitor the area. They even built the security locks to make sure the Paradox Pokemon stayed in Area Zero. When I said that Gita knows more than she lets on, this is what I meant. We know she's visited the Zero Lab, and the fact she knows that Area Zero is dangerous means that she must have known about everything that went on in the Great Crater. The release of Paradox Pokemon, the time machine, maybe even a tragedy that would follow after. The professor from our timeline builds the AI, and production doubles. They bring in the second Koraidon or Miraidon, and eventually they pass away a couple of years ago due to the incident in the research station with the crystals. And that is what leads into the events of the game. Arvin will try to find out why his father or mother stopped sending emails after a couple of years, and Mabastev will get hurt in the process. Team Star will form as a result of the bullying in the academy, which leads to the massive change of personnel and the wiping of all data. Nemona will battle some people. I love her, I promise. And then will arrive for the events of Scarlet and Violet to begin. You know everything that happens afterward. So then, what happened to the other timeline's professor? The one we encounter at the Crystal Pool? I will remind everyone of what that professor says to us. Perhaps I should take this chance to go home and enjoy a bit of downtime with a good book. Remember how our own timeline's professor named Koraidon and Miraidon themselves? Remember how instead of going back home, they just built the time machine? The white volume they received wasn't complete. It didn't have all the answers they sought, so they needed more. but the one we give to this professor is complete. And because of that, they also find out about what happens to them, to Arvin, and to Paldea as a result of the time machine. I believe the Indigo Disc doesn't present us with a bootstrap paradox, but instead with a good ending for the professor in a different timeline from our own. For this ending to be achieved though, our timeline needs to happen. And for our timeline to happen, a different one in which the professor receives a slightly more incomplete book is necessary. And for that timeline, perhaps another far more incomplete white book. It is an infinite chain of timelines, influencing each other through subtle and imperceptible ways. The literal concept of turtles all the way down, and the Guardian of Area Zero is at the bottom of everything. Would it not be more of an adventure to march towards the past instead, to start from our present and study history in reverse? This sentence from Ryford sums up everything in Scarlet and Violet. It is a story about how the future influences the past. The ancients used their knowledge from the future to build things that were impossible for their era. Keith learned about Terapagos from the future and wrote down the information he was told in the book. Sara and Turo learned many things about Terapagos from us and created the time machine with that knowledge. And it was all planned from the start. As soon as Terapagos awakens, he walks towards us without hesitation. Because, after all, our encounter was predetermined. The treasure hunt is over. Thank you so much for watching. This series was so fun to make. I'll admit the ending parts of Scarlet and Violet are a little more messy, and I don't know how much of it is intended or accidental. But regardless, I think it makes for a cool story anyway. I apologize if the Guardian of Area Zero planned everything angle is a little far-fetched, but I think I've earned myself a little tomfoolery after all of this. In the end, I just hope these videos have made you think a little more about Paldea's lore. There are still some topics I'd like to tackle one day when it comes to Paradox Mons and things like that, but this is everything when it comes to the history of Paldea for now. I need a good old break from this region, oh my god. I'll see you some other time. For now, keep dreaming.